And welcome back. My name is Quinten Krzysko. I am joined by Mr. Ron Luce. We are building the board, brought to you by Bears on Tap. And why are we here today, Ron?
Because Q, we're here to talk about my favorite position, perhaps to grade besides the fat boys up front, and that is running backs.
So when we first started the project this year, and we're talking about NFL draft prospects, to be clear, for the Chicago Bears. But when we first started this year, and I was talking to you about doing running backs with you, I was like, I'm kind of nervous about it. I felt like I didn't have a good feel for running backs the last 2 years, and you told me as an offensive line guy, just think about it as if you're the offensive lineman, right? Like, how do you feel about what the running back is doing behind you? Do you feel like he got enough? Do you feel like he should have done something different? And man, the feel for it has really come to me this year. I've started to become really opinionated in my running back.
That's good. That's good.
In previous years, it was very I don't really know how to argue anything, but like this year, I do feel pretty convicted in it, which probably means I'm going to get them all wrong. But either way, we're here to talk running backs. And before we get into like Scott from Iowa says, RBs are cool and tough, just not at 10, according to him. We'll see. I don't have a strong opinion on that, believe it.
Agreed.
Actually. But before we get into the draft prospects too much, we want to answer 3 questions. What do the Bears have at running back? What does a running back look like in this offense? And how much draft capital will the Bears be spending at running back, to Scott's comment. Now, to start this off, Ron, what do the Bears have at running back right now?
Well, obviously, I think the 2 names that everybody's most familiar with certainly are DeAndre Swift, who obviously has 2 more years on that deal that he signed last free agency. Obviously, a very different, a yin to a yang in terms of free agency for 2024 to 2025 for the Chicago Bears. But obviously, he is still the lead back, at least as of now. We'll see when we're talking again in May, but for now, he's still the guy. Roschon Johnson still on the roster. Bears used 4th-round draft capital on him a few years ago. And then Ian Wheeler, I know, has been a name that people I've noticed have still include as a part of that Bears room. Obviously, we didn't really get to see a whole lot of him because of the season-ending injury in preseason, but the limited amount of action that he did have as really just an undrafted free agent coming in and being I don't want to say a body on the roster because that's not the right term, but being a guy that I think had low expectations for a lot of people, I think he definitely exceeded those expectations. Maybe not to he's guaranteed a roster spot level in this coming season, but they kept him around. They kept him as an injured part of the roster. So I think they feel pretty highly about him as well. And I think it's at least worth including him in the conversation here because he'll at least probably be in training camp with the team once August rolls around.
Yeah, I mean, he had some pretty wild speed that you'd love to get on the field. And I'm with you. I'm not saying that he deserves a roster spot or like he's gonna get one. Heck, I mean, I'm actually curious now. I wonder how many running backs the Lions did roster last year. Because I imagine it might have been 4, honestly, with how much running they do and how much it matters to what they did. But you figure Swift's here. You figure Johnson's probably here. I figure Johnson's gonna be here, but it wouldn't shock me if he's not here that much longer if Ben Johnson doesn't see a strong reason to have him around. But for him not to have a strong reason to have him around would shock me because the entire selling point on Roschon Johnson is the locker room guy, the work ethic, the special teams contributions. Like, he can do everything. So even if he's 3rd or 4th running back on the roster, I'd be shocked if he was just gone because he gives you all that.
Definitely. In referencing your point about the Lions, according to this, they had 5 running backs on the roster. Now, I would imagine that Jermar Jefferson was mostly a practice squad guy, only played 2 games, but Sion Vaki had 16 games, Craig Reynolds 17 games, 14 for Monty, 17 for Gibbs. So you have to think that they pretty much carried 4 running backs throughout most of the season with the Reynolds and Vaki playing more special teams than anything else. But yeah, man, I agree with you. What does a Ben Johnson running back look like? I think I don't know if we have an answer to that question. I know it's really easy for a lot of people to point the finger and say, well, it's Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery. It's like, Well, yeah, but he had a lot of success with those players. But think back to 2022. His backfield was DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, right? A very different looking group. But I do think the one thing that we can come down to and at least boil down from at least his time as a play caller is he likes to have a yin and a yang in his backfield, right? Two guys that are very different. They do a lot of the same things well, but at the same time, each one has their very kind of glaring strengths of like, oh, okay, I see why you're on the roster, but then I also see why this guy's on the roster, and I see why you guys share a backfield. So to me, that's what it is, I think, for Ben Johnson. Now, granted, if you get one really explosive running back and then have an okay off-pace guy, you probably can get away with it as well and still feel like it's a Ben Johnson team. But, I mean, look at the amount of success that Monty and Gibbs were both able to have, even splitting touches. I mean, it just goes to show Ben Johnson wants to pound the rock, and if he's got more guys that can do it efficiently and at a high level, he's going to have them on the roster.
Yeah, I think the best, because I think the way you touched on the two guys who complement each other, yin and yang, I think that's perfect. But I think I do see a trend in what a Ben Johnson running back is. It is, so today, Ben Johnson had a quote, or maybe it was yesterday, a quote about what they're looking for on offensive line. And he was like, I want them, mean, dirty, tough,
Nasty,
and smart. And I think that's what he wants at running back too. Because I mean, you might say Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't fit that. Have you ever seen Jahmyr Gibbs pass block? That dude puts people on their asses, and he has no right doing it. Like, he wants grit at his running back. He wants his running back to match his offensive line with intensity, with grit, and that's my opinion, at least. I think that, and you look at, you go back to Jamal Williams when he was there, another guy who fits that same mold. And I feel like his time in Miami, there, even though he wasn't a play caller, but those Miami running backs back then also kind of fit that mold to a degree, being bigger, tougher runners, where I don't think it necessarily has to be big because, like you said, the yin and the yang. But I'm thinking Jay Ajayi and
I was gonna say, was Jay Ajayi there? That was gonna be my exact question to you. I'm trying to line up timelines in my head.
I mean, I think it was just in my head. I'm kind of going off the top. I think you're right. I think that matches, and so to me, that's what I'm looking for in these running backs: is that grit, that want to, that drive, to do the things that not everyone does.
I like that you said that, because you can even throw Monty into the discussion as well, right? Of running backs that fit that mold and what they do. And I'll tell you what, now that you've said that, there's a very clear set of guys that we're going to talk about today that, in my opinion, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a Ben Johnson guy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think there's also a lot of guys that we're going to talk about today that I immediately go, I don't know if that's a Ben Johnson guy, based on what you said, because I think you're onto something, Q. I really do. I never thought about it that way. And I'm glad you shared that, because now that changes my perspective on, just quickly, I mean, we both did our homework on these guys. I know you watched a nauseating amount of film on other positions as well. I was more running back focused this year, but just that quick thought of addition to the body of work of our film study immediately, I think, has changed my opinion on a few guys, at least in terms of a fit for the Bears. Maybe not as are they going to be a good pro or not, but certainly, are they going to be a Chicago Bear or not?
Yeah. And the non, I guess, meatball football guy answer, the more X's and O's answer, I think, is a guy who has no scheme limits. I don't want a zone only runner. I don't want a gap only runner. I want a guy who has a good feel for both. But Ron, how much draft capital do you think we see the Bears spend at running back?
Oh man, I'm on board with, I think, Scott, in the sense of I don't know if they need to do that at 10. Now, granted, if the draft shakes out in a way where Ashton Jeanty is the best player available and you want that guy, go get him. I'm in favor of that. But I do think if, a Mason Graham somehow slips to number 10, if, there's a guy that they're very convicted on about, maybe a Josh Simmons there at number 10, I would even see a world where if the Bears could swing it, maybe just moving back a few picks. Somebody's really desperate to get up to 10 because they like a certain guy. maybe they're willing to part ways with an extra, and probably because of this year's draft, you're probably not going to get a ton of draft capital. You're not going to get what the Bears got for, Justin Fields moving up 9 spots or whatever it was, but maybe you get a 3 in this year's draft. Maybe you get like a 2 next year or something. I think that's very plausible. And obviously a flip of first rounders. I think they're going to take a running back with one of those 2 second-round picks. I really do. I think that is the sweet spot. Unless things go completely haywire from picks, we'll call it 20 to 35, where a bunch of guys go that people don't expect, and all of a sudden there's guys that they weren't expecting to be there at 39 and 41 that all of a sudden are, then I could see them punting maybe to 72. But one of their first 4 picks is going to be a running back. That, at least, I am very convicted on. Of like, if they leave the 3rd round and there isn't a running back drafted already, I would be so surprised. I would happily live stream myself drinking Chicago handshakes, talking football with you on this show, because I really do like it. It's in the first 4, but my gut tells me it's in one of those 2 second-round picks. What do you say, Q?
I think in the first 4 picks, you have an offensive guard, an edge rusher, a defensive tackle, and a running back in some order. I don't know what the order is yet. I think edge rusher needs to be one of the first 2 picks. So that's either 10 or 39. And even at 39, I'm skeptical of what you're actually getting there anymore. So like in my mind, 10 almost has to be an edge rusher at this point. And I think you're going O-line with 39 or 41. The tough point is there's going to be a strong desire to take running back at 39 or 41, I think. And it's such a deep defensive tackle class. I know you can probably get some really good defensive tackles at 72, but man, I'm just in love with some of the guys who are going to be there at 41. And I'm just like, I don't know how you pass on them. Like, so it's a tough spot there.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, not to get too far off the rabbit hole, because obviously we're here to talk about running backs today, but I think that's why if the Bears somehow can move down from 10, they're absolutely going to, especially if they have like a slew of guys that they really like, but they're pretty confident are going to be there if they moved back 5 to 10 spots. I could see a world where, if you move back far enough, I think you could get another 2 in this year's draft. If somebody's real convicted, like maybe like a team like Baltimore, somebody who's closer to a contending window, that's like, oh, we really want that guy because he's going to fill a need. Maybe you get another 2 and another 3. And then all of a sudden, to your point, Q, that opens up tons of options, because now you're not just pigeonholed to like, well, we have 39, 41. We want to take it back here. Maybe you end up getting 51 as well in the second round. Maybe that's where you go running back. And I think that could be something that we really keep an eye on as whispers and rumors start to come when we get a little closer to the end of April.
Yeah, I don't think this will happen, but like if Shedeur Sanders falls, Pittsburgh's sitting there saying we need a quarterback, like I don't think Pittsburgh is going to trade much. Like it's not their style, but just an idea. But yeah, Ron, let's get into this running back class. And let's start off with the man with the hammer himself, Ashton Jeanty. What do you see with Ashton Jeanty, Ron?
Ashton Jeanty, to me, runs so much like Alvin Kamara. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it stylistically. He runs in a way that nobody can get a clean shot on him. He's Gumby. He runs like Gumby. He just bends and boops off of all contact that he absorbs. He's got great vision. Obviously, the speed's there. We don't know what his 40 time is yet because he's going to run that at his pro day. I'm sure he's going to run probably somewhere around 4.4 would be my guess. I think if he runs anything under a 4.4, his draft stock goes up, if that's even humanly possible. To me, he is such just a unique back in this class as well because of his size-weight combination. He's tree trunks. That's really what he is. I saw somebody make the comparison to a Maurice Jones-Drew, and I was like, ooh, I don't hate that comp, but I almost think he's a little better than MJD was coming out of college. So, but that's my opinion of him. He is just that Gumby. You can't tackle him cleanly. You're never going to get a clean shot on him that's going to disrupt his progress. He's always falling forward upon contact, and that's really important in a running back in today's NFL.
Yeah. So like if we look at what Steve Letizia at CFC Bears on Twitter, one of our fellow scouts wrote, he did the Ashton Jeanty scouting report a while back. He comped the ceiling to LaDainian Tomlinson and the floor to D'Angelo Williams. So like he thinks he's a very high floor because D'Angelo Williams ruled in like a very high ceiling. And I see a lot of that. I mean, I I love Ashton Jeanty's tape. Like, I mean, there's a few backs that you talk about when you talk about the guys who were considered generational talents. And I hate it when people say they hate the word generational. Like, it's some guys are just different prospects. They're different in the field.
Some
And
dudes are just like
Saquon Barkley was one of them.
Sure was.
Bijan Robinson was one of them.
Mhm.
Ashton Jeanty is one of them. And it deserves to be said. They are a different tier of prospect. So I like Saquon Barkley was before I started doing all this. But Bijan Robinson was the first year where I really watched a lot of draft tape. And, I liked him and I saw it, but I didn't love it. And I do think from a pure like trait standpoint, from a like everything you can analyze and break down, how is he doing pass protection? How is he a receiver? Like, all the different ways he can win. Bijan Robinson probably has more, but I don't think Bijan had an ace card the way that Ashton Jeanty has an ace card of he's just so shifty in traffic and so hard to square up. And he combines that with the power that to be able to break tackles. It's just like you watch him against Power 5 opponents, and he's still doing it. So like, and yeah, the college football playoff was rough, but like, they also knew he was running every single play. So, you
got all 11 guys worried about you on defense.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're going to get stopped.
I'm a big fan of Jeanty. I don't know, like, my opinion if the Bears took him at 10 will all be about how the board looked, who was available there. But, if all the big names are kind of gone and you're sitting there going like, we could take Michael Williams, we could take like Tyler Booker maybe, like, and none of them are really sitting right. I can live with Ashton Jeanty and I can be excited about that.
Definitely. Especially too when you combine that into the body of work that we have seen from Ben Johnson with other running backs, all over the place. Scott, everyone was saying here, Jeanty comp is 97 Curtis Enos. I don't think Scott's going to like what we have to say about his guy later, but we'll hold off on that for now.
Yeah. So let's move it along to Omarion Hampton. And man, I just wrote my report on Hampton the other day, and I've watched a few games of his over the last few months. Man, he is an interesting guy to watch. Like, he might have the best processor of any back in this class from the standpoint of he sees it, he does it. There is no delay. There's no hitch. There's no pause. He sees it, he does it, and it's not like he's running ahead of his blocks. His vision and his processing are outstanding already, and I think he's a first round pick, a clear first round pick because of it, because he is so decisive it's rare to see a guy who's decisive without running ahead of his blocks. And he does it in such a clean way and with tempo and just the burst. He runs with good tempo. What I mean by that is he changes his speed to change the tackling angles and change the way blockers are able to approach him, and then has the burst to really make them pay for it. And then just, you mentioned Ben some with Jeanty. I thought Hampton had some pretty impressive bend with his ability to bend the runs, the ankle mobility, the knee bend. There's just so much to like in his game. There were some times where it's like, you're going down with an ankle tackle like that. I do think he tends to run a little high once he hits the second level, and that leads to a lot of the ankle tackles where it's just like a balance issue because his pad levels come up, and not a huge factor as a blocker, as a receiver. There's just not a lot to really see there. I think he will be a 3-down back eventually. I don't see anything in the way of it. And when I see how quick his processor is, I think the guy's going to figure it out pretty quick. But I mean, I comped him to Deuce McAllister. He was a hard comp.
Ooh, I like that comp a lot. I'll tell you what, Omarion Hampton, this is the year, Q, just as a whole, of like, the body types of these backs are so different compared to so many years of years past. You know, you're so used to seeing like a lot of little guys coming out, and then you get a couple of big guys, and usually the big guys are slow. Like this is the first year that guys are big and they're fast, and it's kind of fun because there's 3 running backs in this class, depending where you look, that could be considered 6 foot. Like it's very rare that you see that. And Omarion Hampton's one of them. Like he's one of those guys that's very much pushing 6 foot. I mean, 221 was his combine weight. He's huge, but he doesn't run like he's 220. You know, he runs gracefully. He runs, like you said, the processing's unbelievable. And I think what's more impressive, like Ashton Jeanty obviously was by far the best player on Boise State's roster, right? And we knew that. But Boise State, compared to 90% of their opponents, is always better than them from a talent perspective. Like as a university, they're getting 4-star recruits. Like they might get the once in a blue moon 5-star. Like they're not, they have a high prestige as a program, right? We'll talk in college football video game sense for those out there. The little bit of difference from them to like North Carolina, Omarion Hampton was that offense. Because it was painful watching the film, all the incomplete passes downfield, you know, all the, you know, missed blocks by the O-line. And then Omarion Hampton's still averaging like 9 yards a carry in certain games. And it's like, that in itself is impressive because he is kind of a one-man wrecking crew. You know, he's the best player on that offense, and yet teams still couldn't keep him down. And I think in addition to that, Q, tons of college production. That's always something I'm interested to see. I know that's not everything about running backs of like what they did at the collegiate level. Some of that's opportunity. This guy rushed for over 1,500 yards in back-to-back seasons. He's the only one in this draft class that can say that. It's pretty impressive. And Omarion, he's fun to watch. And I'll tell you what, I waited to watch Hampton and Jeanty because they were so highly regarded. I wanted to watch everybody else and then watch them. I get why people are excited about Omarion Hampton. And Q, dare I say, if the Bears are sitting there at 10 and Jeanty's there, and a team wants to come up for Jeanty, I could see the Bears moving back in the first round and still taking a back because I think Hampton would fit the Ben Johnson style of play almost to a T.
Now, we can think back to 2 years ago when Jahmyr Gibbs went, like, what was he, 6? Bijan Robinson went, like, 6 to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And then the Lions took Jahmyr Gibbs at 11 when no one expected Jahmyr Gibbs to go in the top 20. Like, I almost wonder if we might see something like that.
Are you saying Ashton Jeanty's going 6 and Omarion Hampton's going to the Bears at 10, Q?
I'm just saying it kind of matches what Detroit did a few years ago.
Kind of does.
It's different.
You're not wrong.
Like Hampton is a different player than Gibbs, but like I wouldn't be. I'm just saying it's possible. But to your point about Hampton, Warren Sharp had a tweet today about running backs in the last decade. Hampton was the second best running back in yards per carry on runs when hit behind the line of scrimmage in the last decade. Number 2 in highest percentage of his team's entire touches at 44% of North Carolina's touches. Number 2 in highest percentage of team's entire receptions, 17% of their receptions. So, like, yeah, you're right. He was that team's offense.
Hell yeah. He's impressive. He's fun to watch.
Moving it along, let's get to these national championship Buckeye running backs. It started off with Quinshon Judkins, and I'll let you go first round before I steal everything from you.
Just steal it all. This is so hard for me. So people that might not know, I am an Ohio State truther, but I have been for a very long time. There's a Troy Smith jersey chilling in my closet right now. Like we're talking Jim Tressel days of Ohio State is when we started watching the Buckeyes. So I'm not a bandwagoner for everybody out there throwing shade. I love both of these guys. Like in a perfect world, I'm putting both of them on the Bears and we're going to have a great time with them in the backfield because there's your yin and your yang. Judkins is definitely the more physical running back, the more explosive running back. I mean, shit, look at his combine. He jumped out the gym with the broad jump. Wasn't it 11 feet?
Yeah.
On the broad jump for him?
That's wild.
Craziness. Yeah. I mean, he is an explosive runner. He screams Ben Johnson style of running. That's what Quinshon Judkins is. He's not much of a receiving threat. He can catch the ball. I'm not saying he's completely useless in the passing game, but he's very seldomly sent out on complex route patterns. He's usually just run to the flat, be the check down guy in front of the line of scrimmage. They don't ask him to do a whole lot else than that, or at least they didn't at Ohio State. And he's not much of a pass blocker. That's just not what he does. And the few times that he tries to, it's underwhelming, to say the least. But if you want a guy from just a pure physique standpoint that's going to hit the hole, hit it with authority and with intention, that's Judkins. And he has no problem barreling people over. He's not scared of contact. In fact, I think he welcomes it. I think he's almost he's an important type of running back in today's NFL, Q, because he never takes like the big bad hit that's going to ruin his career, but he lays kind of the lumber on a lot of teams. And if you're the type of team that wants to run the football a lot and then you want to get a lead and then you want to preserve a lead, he's the kind of guy that's going to wear down a defense over the course of a full 4 quarters. And there's something to be appreciated for that, man. He's a fun watch. I think watching his Ole Miss film is also a key in his evaluation, because then you really get to see him with a little bit less talent than what Ohio State had last year. Obviously, they're still an SEC school. There's still plenty of talent down at Ole Miss, but Judkins is probably one of the more explosive backs in this draft, quite frankly, at the end of the day. And he's a fun watch, man. He's going to be something for somebody in this draft. And I think he's probably a high second rounder if we're talking, teams wanting these type of guys. To me, Judkins fits kind of almost in the territory of where the Bears are going to pick in that second round, around 39 or 41.
If I were betting any individual pick at one of 39 or 41, it would probably be Judkins.
Yeah.
Like if I had one player to bet the Bears come out of the second round with, he makes a ton of sense to me. I think he is versatile with his vision, where he can be your get downhill gap runner, or he can be your patient zone runner. I just think he's a ball of clay. Like when I look at his athletic profile, when I look at his tape, I think this year at Ohio State, probably the last 2 years, he was tasked with being the early down power back, and he did it. He's really interesting to watch because he's not your traditional power back. Traditional power back squares up the tackler and falls forward, right? He doesn't do that. No one hits him square. He's got too much shake. He does not get hit square at the college level, which is what lets him break all those tackles. He is not just plowing. He is destroying angles, so you cannot get a clean hit on him. He is so shifty. I mean, he ran a 4.48 at the combine, faster than, I think people thought he was. And, that showed in the national championship game this year when he put up 130 yards and 14 touches. He was breaking away from people left and right. This guy's got juice. He's got explosion. He can make the people miss in the open field. There's so much to like. And I think that you take him out of that power role and ask him to be something different. I think he can do it. I think he can do whatever you need him to do. He is such an impressive football player to me. I really like how creative his vision is. And I've seen people on Twitter arguing about Judkins has great vision. Judkins has terrible vision. And I think a lot of it comes down to how much you value creativity. Because I think he is a very creative runner. And he sees things that most people won't see.
He's also a very decisive runner in the sense of when he sees something that might be abnormal to the standard eye, he commits to it. There's no hesitation with that either. When he goes, he's going. If he sees a shimmer of light in the B gap on a play where maybe it's designed to go A gap, he's going to go and he's going to do it quickly, which is important, right? It's like when you're driving, Q, right? When you're going to make a decision that might be a little aggressive on the road, just do it. Don't hesitate, right? Because hesitation gets you killed. It's kind of the same way with Judkins. So I can see that though, but I like the term creativity in terms of how he runs, because I do think he's not your standard runner because of that creativity, because he is going to go off script a little bit sometimes if he sees something that he thinks he can do something with, because again, nobody knows themselves better than an individual. You see that in his decisiveness and how he runs and the way he hits the hole.
Yeah. I mean, I just for reference here, I comped him his ceiling to Nick Chubb and
Ooh.
his his median, I guess, or his, what did I call it? His most likely, as I don't even want to use most likely, his middle ground comp as Jay Ajay,
Yeah,
guy who we
I can see
mentioned
that.
earlier.
Yeah. A guy
Um,
that played under Ben Johnson.
yeah. But so when we're looking at, let's see, I had a thought about how to transition this over to TreVeyon, and now I can't remember it. Oh well. So now we're moving on to TreVeyon Henderson. We're going with an uncreative transition.
That's okay. Uncreative still gets the job done,
Yeah.
Caleb.
Now with TreVeyon, Ron, what do you got?
See, I am probably one of the bigger TreVeyon truthers, and there's a reason for that. I love a complete running back that does all the little dirty things that don't get the glory, and maybe that's the inner offensive lineman in me talking. But TreVeyon Henderson to me is probably the most complete back in this draft because he's probably the best pass blocker of anybody. I shouldn't even say probably. I think he is the best pass blocker of everybody in this draft. And stepping into the NFL, I bet he's going to be one of the best pass blockers at the next level too. He has no fear in the pass blocking game. And if you want to see, go look out the Michigan tape. Go watch him put soon to be top 10 NFL draft pick Mason Graham flat on his ass in pass pro. It's awesome. Q got it on repeat like 3 times from me when I was watching this stuff. But I will say this about TreVeyon, because if you love someone, you got to be honest with him. He's not nearly as explosive as Judkins. And he has the vision in the zone game, especially in the outside zone game. But if it's a gap run, he's going to the gap and he's putting his head down. And he's not built like that. And you and I talked about that off air and just on the side on numerous occasions. He's obviously a little faster than Judkins, but he's also a little smaller than Judkins. I mean, a good 20 pounds smaller and a tick shorter. So to me, I don't see TreVeyon as a fit for the Bears per se, unless he was complemented by a Judkins-like player. But having Swift there already, I think there's a little bit of redundancy because Henderson's also a very good pass catcher as well. And I think he sees the field well in space. I think he's going to be a great NFL running back. I just don't think he would be a great Bears running back. And unless he's the Yang to, say, a Judkins Yang, right, in a Ben Johnson style offense. So I love TreVeyon Henderson. And again, they're 2 very different running backs. But TreVeyon is not as explosive, definitely is more on schedule is what I'll call him, I think, as a running back. But when it comes to the little things, Q, from pass blocking to catching the football and running with it in space to even carrying out a fake, because that's important. A lot of people undersell the value of carrying out a fake. There was one particular play. It's against Oregon. I believe it was in the college football playoff game.
I am so happy that you noticed this too. And
yes.
I'm not the only psycho who was like,
no,
this dude kills it on his play action fakes.
He's so good on his play action fakes to the point where there was a specific play, and I'll find it. I will find it, and I will somehow manage to clip it and show it to the people. But the Ohio State runs where they pull their right side guard and tackle going right, like it's an outside pitch. Henderson is to Cade Howard's right. Howard flips the pitch, and Henderson fakes the catch and sprints to the sideline, takes 4 defenders with him from Oregon, and they have, I think it was one of their 3rd receivers coming back across the formation. Howard hits him on the backside on just a little drag route across the field. But because of the amount of players that the play action dragged to the right side of the field, he scores a touchdown from 25 yards out. It is one of the coolest plays I've ever seen executed on a football field. And again, when it comes to the little things, to me, there is nobody better in this draft than TreVeyon Henderson. But they're the things that go underappreciated to the common fan because they don't show up on the stat sheet. So that's why I say he's going to be a great pro. I just don't see him fitting in a Chicago Bears offense the way it's currently constructed in terms of roster personnel. But he's an awesome football player. I think if he had Judkins' explosiveness with everything else he has, we're talking about him and Ashton, Jeanty, and Omarion Hampton all kind of at the same level. I think that's the thing that kind of drops him down to that next tier of running back is that lack of that high level explosion. Like he didn't jump out the gym. He ran well, but he's also not really going to run people over. That's not his game.
What did he get on his explosive testing? Because I didn't realize he was not as explosive. I thought it was
8.82 RAS in comparison to Judkins.
Okay, so
9.87.
That was mostly so his jumps he crushed. His 10-yard split was a little rough. And a lot of it's his size that's pulling down his RAS.
Mm-hmm.
And so that being said, with Henderson, like I did think he was pretty explosive. Like it was just that he didn't know how to tempo it. He was a one-speed runner. He gets the football and he runs as fast as he can.
And he goes.
Which means there's no place to get more explosive because he's already moving as fast as he can, right? He's not setting anything up. He's not. We talked about with Judkins how he doesn't get squared up. TreVeyon
Henderson
always
does.
gets squared up.
Yeah.
He tries to plow through everybody. And if he could learn to tempo his speed, I would be really, really high on him.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the delay for me. Like, and he's tied for the second highest floor of any back in this class besides Jeanty. Like him and Omarion and Hampton, I have the same floor on. They are walking into the NFL as starting running backs.
Definitely.
And truly, I think Henderson's floor is a little higher than Hampton because he is an instant 3-down back. Like you said, his pass blocking is the best I've ever seen from a college runner. Like it's outstanding. He can do things in the passing game that most running backs at college level cannot. But I value vision and patience a lot. And that's where absolutely. I really struggled with his tape. He ran ahead of his blocks a fair amount. And it was just kind of like I'm banging my head against the wall going like, slow down. Just slow down. And this Ohio State O-line is really good. You slow down a little, you're taking this 20 yards instead of 5. Like,
and I think that's something I'm sure that teams are looking at right now and looking at their running back coach saying, can you coach? Because that's coachable, right? Like learning how to tempo yourself, it's coachable, right? Like you can't coach speed, you can't coach size, but
I question it. I question how coachable
to a fault, right? Like you're never gonna, because there is a feel to it, right? Like there's a natural instinct to it, but maybe sometimes it's even just as much as giving the guy that feedback of, hey, if you were a little more patient here on this play, watch what opens up. And to me, he's a smart enough back from just the film, and you see how he identifies things and the way he scans a field. I think he's the type of guy that with the right coaching situation, I think he could take that game up just a little bit and get him a little higher than a lot of people have him at right now. Again, I don't think he's ever going to be, this all-world back who, goes to tons of Pro Bowls and makes a bunch of all-pro teams, but he's going to start in the NFL for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I think because of what he does in the 3-down territory, he's going to be on a roster for essentially close to 10 years, maybe longer, right? But I agree with you. I think if he can find a way, whether it's just coaching of just, hey, guy, like work on this. Try to see if you can get a feel for that tempo, right? Just even the encouragement of a coach pushing him in that direction to see if that's something he can do, because we don't know if he can or can't, because we've never even seen him try. I think that's going to be what takes him from being a good running back to potentially a great running back in the NFL. But that's a big question mark, I think, heading to the next level for him. So I agree with you there.
I'm kind of willing to bet that he had a good O-line in high school. And, he got praised for hitting the hole hard and going and just running away from everybody. And at Ohio State, freshman year, comes in, really good O-line, hitting the hole hard, running away from everybody. And it's what he's always found success with. So it's just like wired in his brain. This is how you run the football. Right. Like I even think back to high school, like we had, there were 2 running backs, and it was like one of them was really good at getting downhill, getting in the hole and breaking away from people. And the other had a lot of shift, a lot of shimmy. And it was like you couldn't teach either guy to run a different way at the high school level, which is different than the NFL, very different than the NFL from a processing growth standpoint. But that's where I get stuck on him, where it's like it's what's limiting his ceiling to me. If that is something you can coach, his ceiling goes up a ton for me. But
Definitely,
without it, his ceiling is pretty limited for me as far as like, I mean, I comped him to a Lamar Miller. Lamar Miller was a really good running back for years and years, but he never quite became everything he probably could have been, right?
Sure.
Just from a physical standpoint. And that's kind of how I see Henderson.
It's an interesting comp.
I put a lot of thought in these running back comps, like way too much time.
No, that's
it's
good.
Like you can go so deep in the bag because you have such a specific like picture of what did Deuce McAllister look like. You know, I can't go back to the early 2000s to tell you what a guard looked like because I didn't watch the guards closely then. But with running back, I can go back so far. Now we are on to the Bhayshul Tuten hive. The Tuten hive, as Mason West said. And that just sounds so funny. I like to call him King Tut. I haven't found anyone who actually calls him by that nickname, but it has to be his nickname, King Tut. Ron, what did you see on King Tut's tape?
I'll tell you, I was initially watching the tape a little underwhelmed at times of certain elements of his tape, right? Anytime he runs in between the tackles, you know, there's not a ton of physicality, but there is some. Like he's a willing runner, right? He's not afraid of contact, but he's certainly not going to run anybody over. You know, I think a lot of it was just the way Virginia Tech runs their offense. It's a lot of just kind of one and go. Like there's not a lot of opportunity to, you know, read and react and make cuts. But holy shit, when homeboy catches the edge and gets an open field, he's fast. He makes fast people look not fast. If you know, you know. He is.
You're like, I don't get it.
Quick.
I get it. Oh,
I get it now. Yes, that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened watching Tuten for me. So it was just like okay, all right. Oh shit. Okay, there it is. Like that's what we've been waiting for. And again, I think that 4.32 speed reflects on the tape. And again, I watch him run and I go, there is some coach in the NFL that is drooling over this guy right now, especially maybe late third round, maybe sooner. I mean, if a team really likes him enough in a weaker draft at a lot of other positions, I could see running backs going higher just because of teams really liking them and aren't sure that, you know, aren't sure that they're going to be there. I really do believe that Tuten's got just that hit, and you get him in open field and he's gone. And that's kind of hard to say about a lot of the guys, I think, in this year's draft. I don't think there's a ton of guys that have that fourth gear. Tuten does.
Yeah, I mean, he has that speed to just utterly devastate tackling angles, right? And he knows how to use that speed really well, I think. I thought that he did have a good feel for varying that speed and when to hit the gas versus when to just kind of cruise and let guys kind of change their line to him. And then boom, I'm hitting the pedal, I'm gone. The thing that is the most interesting to me with him is something that on our episode with Mason West, we talked about. It was all about body mechanics and that he moves different than other people. He has a lot more flexibility in his frame, a lot more bend, a lot more just, he is a different type of athlete physically and a different type of like, he almost has like a gymnast type, like flexibility where he can do weird things with his cuts, with his frame. He can really get his extremities outside of his frame as he's planting, kind of move in weird ways. If you want to hear more about it, I would highly suggest going and checking out the body mechanics episode with Mason West, because he puts it in much more eloquent ways and technical ways than I could, other than me just saying, "Oh, that dude's different." But I really like a lot of what I see from his tape. He also has kick return experience. From what I can gather, he returned punts in high school. He only returned one punt in college, potentially because he does have some fumbling issues. That might be why he got taken off punt return. But it's there if you feel like you can get confident with it. There is some experience there as a punt returner, which I think is big for him. I don't like his offense. We'll get to this in the Kansas offense too. I am skeptical of offenses that rely heavily on read option with mobile quarterbacks and spread concepts, because they just create such favorable space for the running back that it's hard to assess how they do in traffic that they're going to see in the NFL.
Sure.
So that is a factor here for me that knocks him down a little bit. Like you mentioned, he's not going to make a name for himself between the tackles very much. Like he's just a little small for it. He runs like he's going to, but a little undersized for it. And he really brings very little to the passing game. I think he doesn't understand his job in pass protection very well, and he doesn't do much as a pass catcher. He was a no-star recruit. I couldn't find a good reason for this. He was a no-star recruit coming out of high school and went to enrolled at North Carolina A&T, the same school as Tariq Cohen went to before transferring to Virginia Tech. And he actually had some really good receiving numbers there. I imagine they were all just check downs where he made 10 guys miss. But yeah, so I comped him to CJ Spiller because I think there's a lot of athleticism similarities, a lot of breakaway speed similarities, but some of the similar limitations that kind of, CJ Spiller had some really nice years a few years into the league. His first few years were a little rough because they tried to use him as a feature back and like a 3-down back. And I don't think that's this guy's role, but I'm with you, Ron. I mean, I think someone's going to take this guy in the second round because someone's going to say, get the ball in that guy's hands and he's electric. He's not going to last that long, I don't think.
And I think too, I kind of like the CJ Spiller comp because I also think to what the NFL is now. I think the offenses in the NFL now are more similar to what CJ Spiller and Bhayshul Tuten would thrive in than they were when CJ Spiller played, right? Like you've seen that evolution to guys like Devon Achane, right? Who, yeah, he can run between the tackles even though he's small, but like you see when he gets out in space and how they get him the ball in space is what makes him a dangerous weapon. I think it's the same way for a guy like Bhayshul Tuten, right? Somebody's going to see that tape, like you said, and say, hey, man, we get him out in space on a quick jet running back, type screen, or you line him up at like a slot and throw him a kind of a bubble screen type thing. Like there's ways to get him involved in the offense without him having to run between the tackles. And again, if you're a team in a really good position where you can take a running back in, say, the late second round and he's there and you really like him. I mean, he's the only guy that ran sub 4.4 aside from Blue that we're talking about here today. I mean, he led all running backs at the combine in terms of 40 time, and people like that fast, and we saw it. Somebody's going to fall in love with that 4.32 speed and definitely take a flyer on him.
Yeah, 4.3 speed doesn't usually last that long in the draft, at least offensively, because if that guy's on the field, every defender needs to know where he is. He's just too fast. No one else in the field can catch him. And that at running back, you don't see it that often. So I'm interested to see where he ends up going because I think that threat is just so huge. But definitely. Moving on to Iowa running back, Kaleb Johnson. Ron, what do you think about Kaleb Johnson?
There's a lot to like, but I feel like I'm missing a ton of from Kaleb Johnson. I like the speed he has to hit the edge. You can see it time and time again when he gets to the outside of that defense. He's able to bend that shoulder and run away from defenders that are trying to get an angle on him. The production's there. I think as a pass catcher, he's a respectable pass catcher. But he doesn't run like a 6'1", 225-pound running back. And that bothers me. Because I look at his frame and I go, that's Matt Forte. Matt Forte was 6'1" and like 222 pounds. I confirmed it today because I was like, I need to see this. But Matt Forte ran a 4.46 on the 40. Whereas a 4.57 for Kaleb Johnson, he doesn't have that same long-term speed, which I'm not as worried about. He's got it in the short-term quickness. But I have a lot of questions about his film. I really do. I know a lot of people are super duper high on him, but I watch his film and I go, you have to understand how Iowa runs the football. They commit everybody on the offense when they run the football. Hell, I watched a play today because I was just watching the last couple games that I wanted to see on some of these guys before we jumped on. They put a running back in pull motion to get him as a run blocker or a wide receiver, pardon me. Like they do a lot of weird, crazy shit at Iowa to commit to the run game. So you have to ask that question of that. And Scott's got a comment here saying Kaleb Johnson's a bigger, faster version of David Montgomery. 0 fumbles, 260 touches, all 1,700 yards. That's great. But when he gets touched with contact, he just dies. There's no fight. I watched him get stuck in the hole by a safety who was very clearly smaller than him, and he just fell over. And it left me screaming at my screen because I say, dude, you are not a 6'1", 225-pound running back if you run like that. There's so much more potential for him to be even just moderately more physical. I don't need him to be a bruiser, but he is not good at after contact. He is I need clean air and clean space to make a difference. And he's really good in open space. But how often are you going to be clean through the line in the NFL? Very rarely. And especially that honestly
without elite beat burst,
right?
Speed,
that's kind of a concern I have about Kaleb Johnson at the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of what you're saying. I struggled with his tape. I think the simplest way I can put it is he wants to run like Quinshon Judkins, but he should run like TreVeyon Henderson. Where I think he is trying to have subtle changes in his body position to create easier broken tackles, but he doesn't have the athletic ability to do that. Yep. So he should just be squaring guys up and plowing them. And that's frustrating to watch from a 6'1", 224-pound back who doesn't have the short area burst and lateral movement ability to be constantly changing those angles like some other guys do. I think some of my kind of bad taste from watching some of Johnson's film definitely comes from the Iowa offense because, he's asked to be everything in that offense. And he does some really sick stuff. Like his highlights are nasty. There's a screen pass highlight, him breaking 3 tackles and busting it for a home run. Yeah, that's awesome. But it's the plays in between the highlights that just don't sit great with me. I just, like you said, I want to see more physicality from him. And if he does, I don't give a shit about the 4.57 if he gets more physical.
Agreed.
It's he has traits to be a really nasty running back. I just need to see that nasty from him more.
Yeah, there's not enough nasty for me to get overly excited about him. I see a lot of the traits, but I agree with you, Q. If it's a run style thing for me with him, it's like if you ran like a 6'1", 225-pound back, I would be much higher on Kaleb Johnson. In fact, I'd probably put him in the same tier as the TreVeyon Hendersons and the Quinshon Judkins. And Scott, I understand what you're saying here. Montgomery's 40 time was 4.63. That's great. I'm not worried about the 40 time. He doesn't run like the running back he probably should. And that's
he doesn't run like David Montgomery.
Yeah, he doesn't
run. Montgomery is a nightmare to tackle.
And he's shifty. Kaleb Johnson doesn't have that same shiftiness that David Montgomery did coming out of school. Just doesn't has it. He's a big body who doesn't know how to be a big body. He tries to be athletic, but just doesn't have the athleticism to do what some of the other guys that we've already talked about do.
And I think some of this is he got hyped up before you and I watched him. And then we watch him and we're
I'm disappointed.
I think he got overhyped.
100%.
It's not where I'm not trying to bash the player.
No,
there is a lot of stuff to like. I think I have a late second or early third round grade on him.
I think that's totally fair. I think it's a perfect grade for him.
Yeah, I've got him at 7.06, which is early third, top of the third round. I think that is where he makes a lot of sense. But I have a hard time putting him in that top 50, top 60 range, just because I think there's all the backs we talked about. I'm more interested in.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree.
Now, moving it along to RJ Harvey out of UCF. And man, RJ is a watch.
He's fun.
very unsuspecting. You know, I didn't know much about him coming in other than that, like on NCAA 25, he's just hell to try to defend against when you're playing against UCF. And like
Naturally.
this guy was a 3-star dual threat quarterback coming out of high school. So he's still pretty new to the running back position. And he's just, I'm trying to think, he's just a short, stout, like ball of explosion who just like can get lateral, super quick, super bouncy, low center of gravity. He's just like a fast bowling ball. Like,
yeah,
I had so much fun watching him. I thought he shows some good patience and creativity. Gets him in trouble a fair amount, especially on inside runs where he's like, "Can I bounce it? Can I bounce it? I think I can bounce it. Can't bounce it." But I really enjoyed his tape. I'm really interested in him in the 3rd round as a guy who, like, man, you can do a lot of fun things with him. He's a threat. He ran better than I expected. I wasn't expecting a 4.4.
Yeah, he ran incredible, I think, compared to what people were expecting. He's a fun watch. And now I want to give a little quick insight here on UCF's offense, which will become applicable once again when we get to Dylan Sampson here in a little bit as well. But this is the way they run the football is actually a technique cue that I am now coaching my offensive linemen to do and for our running backs to do. And it's the Tennessee UCF derived offense. Like this was started by the current Tennessee offensive line coach. He was at UCF before that. So they still use it down there. The way it works is think of it this way. The offensive line is always aiming to protect the inside and aim for half a man and then let the running back make you right. The concept is the running back's always going downhill. He's always moving forward. It's just everything's forward. And then once you're going forward, use that ability to go laterally to find your holes and then pick your poison and then burst. Harvey does it beautifully, probably better than any running back I've watched on the film because he is so good laterally, like you said, where he can start moving forward upon carry. Or, you know, they have a couple of the different plays where they'll snap it and the quarterback starts like almost like booting out and then like leaves it for him and he sits there for a second and then he goes. He's so good at seeing the hole. He's so good at just darting through it. And he is really good at if that hole's there and it gets closed up quickly, he can bounce laterally and find another one. So he runs that offense beautifully because it's always moving forward. But then he has the shifty ability to create mismatches against tacklers or would-be tacklers, I should say. I really liked watching him, man. Like RJ Harvey is kind of originally I was like, I really don't know a ton about him coming into the draft process. I didn't watch a lot of UCF games in the fall. But man, coming out of it, like he's my sneaky, like for those sickos like myself that play dynasty fantasy football and you got a rookie draft coming up, RJ Harvey's the guy I'm watching to see where he lands. Because I think in the right situation, Q, he's going to surprise a lot of people because he is a fun watch. Like if you just like watching good running back highlights, RJ Harvey's kind of that dude.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean to kind of damp it down a little bit, just because you know I do have a 3rd round grade on, not like a 2nd.
Oh, agreed. I would also not take him higher than the 3rd round either.
Yeah. Well, and it's a lot of that is really just the rawness, right? Like I thought that his speed didn't match the 40 time, which we touched on a little. I thought that I wanted a little bit more with his ability in the open field to actually burst and break away from guys. His burst is much more lateral than vertical, I think.
Agreed.
And the patience I already touched on a little. I think he gets happy feet. And some of that might be what you're saying with the what the run scheme is there. But I thought he got a lot of activity on his feet without a lot of production at times. In moments, like I didn't think it was something that was all over the tape, but it was just kind of like, oh, that wasn't a good rep. And then the real knock on him, he doesn't offer much in the pass game, and at his size, you kind of need to be able to be a pass down running back. So it's just he's new to running back. You know, he's only played for a few years there. But for comps, I mean, so my real comp for him is Jaylen Warren, Pittsburgh's running back, who I think is you said it from a pure running back highlight film that you want to watch. Jaylen Warren is up there with anybody. Like I think that they match really similarly, but my ceiling comp for him, which this is if he ever figures out the pass game, Maurice Jones-Drew. That bounce is just so different. It's such a like distinct look to the way that he runs the football. I couldn't help but see Maurice Jones-Drew.
Yeah. No, I can see that too. Yeah, definitely it's the bounce, like you said. Like I don't think it's the build. Like I would almost argue from a build standpoint, you're probably almost looking more at like I don't even know, maybe like a Tuten.
He's a unique build. I mean, he's 5'8", 205. Like he's a weird build.
He is a weird build. Like I would almost argue that like Ashton Jeanty is that build too, because he's a little smaller but he's huge, right? Like he's a bowling ball. But I agree. I think from that bounce perspective, that's a really good comp. I like that comp a lot.
Yeah, I mean it's lofty. That's why
it is lofty. But and it's definitely
that's why I said the real comp is Jaylen Warren.
there's a big what if to that, right? Like there's a lot of development that needs to happen. But I think also too, Q, like I think that's going to excite a team potentially that he is a little bit raw, because then they can continue to improve him. If you get that guy in the third round and he's a guy that you can improve over 2 years to become like a true complete back, and maybe say year 3. You got to get pretty excited about that maybe you found a guy for, 5, 6, 7 years if things all work out, because he has that ability to do everything that you would ask of him.
Yeah, absolutely. But moving it along, let's get to the Kansas running back, Devin Neal. So this is a guy who I mentioned a touchdown a little bit earlier. RPO, misdirection, heavy offense, the very mobile quarterback. Just gave him a lot of horizontal space to work. And he did well with it. I was a little surprised at the 4.58. I didn't think he had good top end speed, but I thought he'd be a little better than a 4.58. Which kind of it's going to impact my eval a little. Like right now, I have a like mid to late third round grade on him. He might drop down a little with that speed just not being like that. Makes me think the space that the offense created was doing some of the heavy lifting for him.
Sure.
Because that says that he doesn't have quite the burst that I thought he might. Like I knew that I might be being deceived. I need to go back and check, was I deceived on this? But I thought he does a really nice job of subtle movements and little jukes to adjust his path and to take away some of those pursuit angles and not get hit clean. That was really his biggest strength, I thought, was that ability to adjust at the tackle point and be able to keep kind of moving forward, keep kind of not get hit clean and not let guys get him down. That's not to say he was a power runner. I didn't think he was. I just thought that he didn't get hit. You know, he had that almost like a little bit of a Bucky Irving kind of trait where like Bucky Irving was just like, I don't get hit. And even in the NFL, Bucky Irving got there. It's like, I don't get hit.
Kind of a wild comp too, because him and Bucky ran very comparably too. Kind of that 4.6 arena of like, hey, I don't have the crazy breakaway speed, and I'm not the biggest guy on the face of the planet, but I've got enough ability with the bend and kind of the Gumby nature to never take a clean hit. I agree with everything you had to say about Neal. I think the only thing to add to that, I will say this guy was productive in college. All 3 years he was an 1,000-yard back. I think he's the only guy that we're profiling today that had 3 seasons outside of Judkins. Judkins had 3 years of 1,000 yards as well.
I think TreVeyon did too.
TreVeyon just missed.
Okay.
He had 1,000 yards his first year, 1,000 yards his past year. In year 3, had almost injuries. 800. And then, his 2 middle years, he had some injuries that kept him from getting there. But, he's got the production. I agree with you, though. The offense definitely, it makes it harder to evaluate him, I think, as a back. But I do like the Bucky comp. I think there's a lot to be said about that, because it's kind of how Oregon runs too, if we really being brutally honest, right? Like it's a lot of RPO, it's a lot of spread option. Like that's kind of their bread and butter too. He's the type of guy that I agree. I don't think he's anything. He's not jumping off the charts at people like, wow, this guy's crazy, and wow, this guy's explosive, and wow, he does all this thing so well. But he does everything solid. right? Like he's just kind of an all-around solid back, in my opinion. I think he's the type of guy that, again, the right situation and the right feel in the NFL, I think he can have a really nice career. But there definitely isn't anything that like wows me about his game, but there's a lot of things to appreciate and like about the way he runs the football.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The 4-5-8 really does change stuff for me because I had his scheme fit as outside zone, and I'm just not sure he has the burst to run outside zone, but I don't think he has the physicality to run inside zone. So I end up in a weird spot of like I'm not sure where he fits. But because my initial comp, my comp was DeAndre Swift for him. He came in DeAndre Swift ran a 4.48, so a full 10th of a second slower on the 40. I'll have to look at how the 10-yard splits compare. If the 10-yard splits are comparable, then I still might like that. But yeah, because I don't know what offense he fits in now. Like I don't know what works for him.
Yeah, I'm not. I think he could get by in an inside zone scheme. I don't think he's going to be dominant in an inside zone scheme, but he can definitely, I think with a good, and again, of course, any running back looks good with a good offensive line, but I do think if he has a good offensive line that is very well versed in the inside zone game, I think he could do a lot of good there. I agree. He's probably not an outside zone guy, at least not all the time. I think every once in a while you could get him out there in the right situation. To me, I think where he brings the most value to a team is probably almost maybe in like a duo style, to be honest, where he's not like physical, but he's going to get forward. He's got those small, subtle adjustments he can make to not take a hard hit. You know, he can probably get you 4 to 5 yards a carry on a pretty regular basis. And I think he's good enough in the passing game where he's going to get opportunities to be a 3-down back. I really do. In particular, one of the games that I watched for him, you know, he took just a simple, check down screen. It was kind of the cross screen, and he took it to the house for, for a touchdown. Like he works well in space. So again, of course, if as is with a lot of these guys, right, you can get them in that clean space. They're gonna do some good things. I think with him though, like because he doesn't fit a certain mold perfectly, I think it's going to take a team really falling in love with his body of work to want to bring him in and say, hey, we'll find a spot for you. We'll figure out a way to make you work in either this system, this version of this system, or that version of this system.
Yeah, I think so. And I think I just knocked him down just a touch behind Dylan Sampson. Just one spot, just thinking that through and talking that through. And yes, we are, or I do change my grades during these shows actually as I'm talking it through with someone being like, it makes you rethink stuff sometimes.
Sure.
But moving on to Dylan Sampson, Ron, what do you see with this running back out of Tennessee?
To me, he's kind of that poor man's almost RJ Harvey, I think a little bit is, again, they run a very similar scheme in terms of Tennessee and UCF in terms of what they're asking their running backs to do. I think his, you and I talked about it a little bit before the show because Sampson was a guy that I was curious to really hear your thoughts as well on. I think he ran a lot better than people expected, and I definitely think that helps him in the long term. I wouldn't say he's like the most flashy back or like the greatest back of them all, but he had a really productive season at Tennessee, and he can do it on limited carries. And I think a lot of that is the style of run game, but you do need the right running back who can do that. And I think you see some of that 4.4 burst that, the 4.42 burst that he's able to put on tape. And it's not all the time, but I think it's a good amount of the time. He's the type of guy, again, too, like I almost with Dylan Sampson, if you asked me to compare him to his predecessor, I like him a lot more than Jalen Wright on tape, much more than I like Jalen Wright. But I think with Sampson, it's really just going to come down to, there's some scheme fit there. He does an okay amount in the pass game, but they use a lot of backs at Tennessee too. That was the thing. It's not just him. It was him and 2 or 3 other guys. So he was an interesting evaluation. I had a rough time kind of evaluating him. I think to me, he's probably like an early 4th is probably the sweet spot for him. I think he's an early day 3 guy. But again, there's enough there to like. I don't love the player, but I do like the player. And I think in the right fit, I think he can he can definitely do some good. Q, are you gonna hate on Sampson here? As Jay asks in the comments, he says,
So
"Don't you dare say anything bad about him."
just as I was looking this up, I saw that from Jay. I was like, I texted him about this yesterday or 2 days ago, so I'm gonna find the text. So basically, I said I don't think his speed matches up to the tape, his tested speed, and I said I've got a third round grade on him, so I do like him. Quote, just not that much as third best running back in the
Yeah,
draft.
as Jay likes him. Yeah.
I feel like he has solid vision and he can cut, and I really like his spin move. His spin move is nasty. But that speed just makes me there were too many times where I don't know if it's hesitation or the speed or what, but his speed to the corner just didn't, it seemed like it was missing something. He
Agreed.
wasn't getting to where I needed him to get, and I'm not sure why after seeing the tested speed. So basically, I mean, I told Jay this yesterday. I feel like he's a watered down Bucky Irving. Like I feel like he's close. Not to say everyone's Bucky Irving, but like I mean, I felt like I was watching a guy who was like, you take a little bit of elusiveness away from Bucky, and this is what he looks like. And he's faster than Bucky. Clearly, I don't know what the issue was with the speed that it wasn't showing up. And he doesn't have a fumbling issue, but two of the best plays I watched film on in the 3 games I watched,
he fumbled. Yep.
And it was just like that crushed his grade because instead of getting a good or a great rep, he got a bad rep because he fumbled. It was like, I mean, I don't know how much I want to make of that. Or I guess, I mean, he might have been fumbling. He fumbled 4 times and 278 touches. It's not terrible. It's not great either. You know, it's a little more than you'd like to see.
I think too, though, like it's also fumbling in like key moments. Like I think back to the one against Bama where he breaks off like a 25-yard run, and at the very end of it gets stripped, and Bama gets the football, and it's like that's just a morale crusher. You know what I mean? That's a momentum shifter. That's the term I was looking for.
Yeah. But for comp, I mean, I thought he fits an inside zone scheme. I thought it low center of gravity, and he does run with some toughness between the tackles. And he was jittery in traffic in those short yard situations. Just did a really nice job being able to find space and get into it, get his body into that space and continue moving forward. I don't think that he's exactly a short yardage back because he's not going to create much push. But I was impressed with his ability to find those little spaces. I comped him to Devin Singletary. He's faster than Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary ran like a 4.66. I think Devin Singletary is faster than his testing time, and I thought Sampson looked a little slower than his testing time. So I think that kind of evens out. If he's Devin Singletary, there's a place for him in this league as a good quality running back. Definitely. You know, I think that he has a lot of things that are working in his favor. I just don't know if he's great at anything, and that's kind of like I don't know what he hangs his hat on. But if he does enough things well, he doesn't need to hang his hat on something.
Well said.
All right, moving on to a guy who is very much the opposite of what I just described, Cam Skattebo. Ron, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on Skattebo.
You know, Skattebo is probably one of the guys I watched the least amount of film on, just because I'm the type of person with a lot of these guys, especially when I've heard the outside noise from people. I want to see your worst game and why it was your worst game. Was it just because of the front you were playing? Was it because you had a lot of bad reps? You know, that's the stuff I want to see. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch any of those games for Skattebo. So I kind of purposely didn't watch a ton of film. Obviously, I think a lot of people watched the college football playoff game where he took the nation by storm.
And that has to matter.
Oh, it sure does. And that's what I got out of Skattebo. To me, Skattebo is probably a late 4th, early 5th round pick. I'm curious to see what he runs. I think that's going to be interesting because once we see his 40 time, I think that's going to tell us a lot. He's a big bruiser of a back. To me, he's the type of guy because of the toughness. And it's not even so much the way necessarily in the way he runs, but just like that gamer in him that somebody's going to fall in love with him. Maybe a couple of teams, especially for a fifth or a fourth round pick. People are going to fall in love with Skattebo. He's going to get an opportunity somewhere in the NFL to showcase what he's got. The situation I mentioned earlier that I could see with Skattebo would be a team like Pittsburgh because they don't have a bruiser. And I think it'd be interesting to see his physicality added to that backfield. Guys like Jaylen Warren and now Kenneth Gainwell, who they added in free agency. But I really do wonder, though, like, he's got good pass catching numbers. Obviously, this guy was a transfer. He wasn't at Arizona State for all 4 years. Like, there's things to like on his tape, but there's nothing about his tape that blows you away either. Like, I think the athleticism to productivity score says it all. He's not super duper athletic, but he was hella productive in college. So to me, that means, hey, you're probably limited in what you could do at the NFL level, but like you did enough good shit with not the greatest Arizona State team of them all to earn an opportunity somewhere in the NFL. Somebody's going to give him a flyer and give him an honest chance in that backfield because honestly, I said it and it doesn't feel like a fair comparison, but like it gives me Peyton Hillis vibes of like a guy who might have a good year or two in the NFL, but like probably phases out over 4 or 5 years, just like a Toby Gerhart, right? Like he to me, he's that same mold of back when it's all said and done.
White running back music. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to preface this with Scott knows ball because Scott says that Skattebo is the Tebow of running backs. And
he's the hype that makes GMs lose their job.
I thoroughly agree that he is the Tim Tebow of running backs.
Yeah.
And I do think that there is like, if you can put the team on your back against a Texas defense that is loaded up with talent, that matters. That matters. The guy played incredible that game. He played incredible multiple games this year and just like utterly willed his team to the finish line. But you know how that happens? That happens through touches.
Mm-hmm.
He gets better as the game goes on. He wears defenses down.
Mm-hmm.
What NFL team in their right mind is giving this guy 20 plus touches a game?
Probably nobody.
That's why he's the Tebow of quarterbacks. He's a great college player. College player. But I don't see how he's getting the touches in the NFL to be what he was. Like the first half of games that I graded for him, it was like, he's fine. Like, and then by the fourth quarter, it's like he is busting off 15 plus yard runs and breaking tackles left and right.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that he's going to be able to wear teams down like that because I don't think he's going to get the touches to do it. And like his first halves will go from having been 3 to 5 yard carries to being 1 to 2 yard carries in the NFL. And like that's not livable. You can't live like that.
And I think that is kind of the really interesting difference between the guy that we just talked about and Dylan Sampson. Sampson was putting up 100-yard games on like 14 carries. Like that's more resemblant to what a lot of these backs outside of probably Jeanty and Hampton are going to see in the NFL. Maybe Judkins too. Those are probably the only guys that are going to routinely see 20 touches a game. Realistically, you're probably in the ballpark of 10 to 15, maybe if you're really solid 18 touches on any given day. There weren't a ton of games where Skattebo was productive getting anything under than like 20 to 25 touches. And some games it's 30 plus touches, especially when you throw in the passing game as well. So I agree with you. Again, great college player. I think he's fun to watch. Somebody's going to bring him in. Like there's no doubt about it. It's probably going to be in the 5th round is my honest opinion of that. But it screams like, hey, you are like the Tim Tebow of the running backs where you're a phenomenal college player. You got that like gamer in you, you're that dude in that essence, but like, are you really going to translate to the NFL? Probably not.
I mean, and he's that dude in that essence, but like, I don't know. There were some perplexing misses in pass protection and some weird moments as a route runner where I'm like, why was he kind of dogging it there? That like, I mean, I think that the dude is a football guy like through and
Mhm.
through, but and maybe that's a volume thing, like playing a ton of snaps. But the if he were coming in the league as a core four special teamer, I think he's a day two. He's going in the third. He's barely played any special teams in his career. He only has
Yeah.
99 college special team snaps. That makes it a really tough sell. He's got to be day three for me.
Yeah, he's definitely a day 3 guy. Jay says that seems like a Giants move, which is kind of funny.
It does. But last guy here, we got Jaydon Blue out of Texas, and he's actually through this conversation, he has moved up at least one spot because I have Skattebo ahead of him now. But Ron, have you gotten to watch much Jaydon Blue?
I've gotten to watch a little bit of Jaydon Blue, but I watched a lot more of Jaydon Blue early in the season. To me, the thing with him, the college production wasn't there a ton, which again, a lot of that's opportunity, right? You're sitting behind Bijan, you're sitting behind Roschon, like you're not playing in your first year or two there. Last year, he gets more of an opportunity, doesn't crack 1,000 yards. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. Obviously, Texas throws the ball a lot. They air it out. They were a very good football team. They had no problem committing to the passing game, especially with guys like Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning at quarterback. But I think with Blue, the speed is there. He's definitely the smallest back that we're talking about, which I don't think is a bad thing when you're still 5'9" and 196 pounds. Like you're really not that small. He's got a pretty noticeable burst that I do appreciate about his game. I think that's my favorite part about him. Like the 4.38 on his tape, in my opinion, shows. To me, though, he kind of gives me in terms of stylistically, kind of like Devin Singletary vibes. Like he's not going to run anybody over, but he is going to fall forward when he does feel contact. He's not the biggest back in the world. He didn't get used a ton in the passing game, but when he did, he could show off some of that shiftiness. Like I think he's a hard grade for me, honestly. I just don't know with Blue. Like there's a lot of good, but I don't know if there's a lot of great. And to me, I think that's what holds him back from a tape perspective.
Yeah, I think you're right. He hasn't played a ton of college football in 3 years, right? He has a 248 career or 215 career carries and 55 career catches. But
for reference, Omarion Hampton had that in one season.
yeah,
like
yeah. But he can fly. And
yeah, he's fast.
weapons who can fly. I think he's going to go at the end of round 3 because someone's going to be sitting there in the 90s and being like, I don't really like anything, but we can't get a trade back. Let's just take the guy who can run a 4.3 and we put the ball in his hands. So that's really kind of what it comes down to. I think he's really slippery in space, good body fluidity. Like he can really make people miss and he can turn that corner. I don't think you're going to run him inside very often. He doesn't have the size for it. He doesn't have the feel for it. He's an outside runner. Maybe you might get some gap scheme outside, but mostly, I think you're talking about horizontal zone running with him. And even that, actually, I don't know. It might be more gap, really, because I don't feel like he has a great feel for zone blocks either. I feel like he's just he has some tempo, but like, I don't know. He didn't run the ball a ton. It's kind of a mystery, if I'm being frank and talking it through, what type of run scheme he can fit outside of a gap run scheme that's going to get him outside on sweeps and like GT counter and stuff like that. He is a weapon in the passing game, though. Absolute weapon in the passing game. He can adjust the football in the air. He has good shake to his routes. He understands leverage as a route runner. And he tracks the football well downfield. It's rare to find running backs coming out of college who can do all that. And that's really his selling point in my mind. If we want to talk about his negatives, he has 7 fumbles on 270 touches in his career. Just limited touches we've already touched on, and he can't return punts. He's returned kicks, but there's no evidence in his college career of him returning a single punt, which makes me wonder, can he return punts? And that's that's going to be important for him here. But he does have some kick coverage experience, so he can play other special teams. But yeah, that's on Jaydon Blue. I've got for comp, I comped him to Nyheim Hines. I think he's a pass down running back through and through. And like, I think that he is going to be a weapon for someone as a pass down running back, and that's going to get him to the back end of the third round. But I don't know that he can be your every down back really ever.
I like that comparison. I agree. I think you look at his film, he almost gives me Achane vibes, but I think Achane is more of a quote unquote bell cow back, despite his size.
Achane at A&M was a bowling ball, man.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
He just wanted to run through people.
Monster. But like, I think with Blue, I agree. I think he's going to have a home in the NFL. Like that, again, you run 4.38, you can catch the football, you're going to have a home as a running back in the NFL. It's just a matter of where it is. But I do like Jay's comment here about Jaydon Blue, saying maybe having the highest ceiling of this like tier of guys who are toward more that like late third, early fourth, even maybe dipping into the fifth. He does have a ceiling. It's just we haven't seen enough of his tape because he only has those 200 and something touches in the running game at his time at Texas. So he's kind of a mystery. But again, if you're going based off raw traits, you see the athletic score out there. I mean, he's got what the third best athletic score of anybody on this list, despite the lack of production. So he's going to be a fascinating one to keep an eye on in year one, but also transitioning into potentially years 2 and 3. Again, somebody's going to take him. He's fast. He's going to be given opportunities. It just, I think a lot of it for him too is also going to be landing spot in terms of success at the next level.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all of that. Now, Ron, because we have had Texas Tech updates all throughout this past segment, I want to add one guy to our list, and that's Taj Brooks.
Sure.
What did you see with Taj Brooks tape out of Texas Tech?
Taj is to me, Taj Brooks is the epitome of he's Caleb Johnson-esque in the sense of he doesn't play to his size. He's huge. He's listed at like 230 pounds. I mean, he's massive, but he tries to juke people rather than trying to run through people. And I think the running through people and a little bit more physicality in his run style would do him a lot of good. Unfortunately, because of that, he tries to do too much sometimes. He tries to get too shifty, and at times that can backfire on him, I think. I really like what he is. I think he's a 5th round pick. Somebody's going to draft him. It's just a matter of, can he do it? And I like that he's listed properly at 214, because I think that's more so what he should run. Again, he was listed at like 230, I think, on Texas Tech's website, if I remember correctly. So if he's shed that much weight, I said it to you, Q, when I watched him the first time, because you wanted my opinion. Mm-hmm. I said, I think based on his running style, if he was to drop weight, I think it would favor his running style more if he's not going to be a physical back at 230 pounds. So to me, if he's coming in at 214 and that's his actual size, that gives me a lot more hope, I think, for his ability to be an NFL back. But he's tenacious. There's no fear in the way he runs, which I think is key. And I think will help him at the next level. I think he's a guy that on day 3 can go, probably 5th round. I would call him probably middle of the 5th round. Maybe he gives you, that ability, to just have an off-pace back. Again, a guy that there's a lot of like what if I think to his game where like you can see the like, oh yeah, this guy was a dude and produced and like, there's no question about it. I think the way he plays was something that I was concerned about. It was like he plays like a shifty back, but looks like a physical back. Where if he's going to drop weight and be 214 at 5'9", I feel a little bit better about him than being a shifty back. And maybe he can be, that guy with 4.5 speed that, gives you a little bit of shimmy in the backfield now, instead of what I think he should have been when he was listed at 230, to try and run people over a little bit more.
Yeah. And so like with Taj Brooks, I've got a late 4th round grade on him.
Yeah.
And I wanted your opinion because I knew I'd be biased at my first watch, to kind of take me out of my Texas Tech bias. But I'm a sucker for a sick jump cut, and he's got that in spades.
He does have a sick jump cut. I love his, like, calling him a shifty back is not a knock on him. He does it well. I just always thought, I looked at the tape and I'm like, man, if he was a little lighter, I think that jump cut plays even better. So I'm hopeful
the burst, the vertical burst. I just wish it was a bit more, because the lateral burst is disgusting. And like at the weight, it's like, I agree with you. I wanted to see him plow guys more. I wanted to see, because he does generate favorable angles for himself.
He does.
But it's like he didn't have enough burst to really capitalize on it. Where, like you said, if he does cut that weight a little, maybe he was 230, maybe he wasn't. That was just Texas Tech being like, yeah, our guy's a monster, because Texas Tech,
he's a unit
here and there. But like, yeah, I think Taj Brooks has the goods physically to be a running back in this league and to start at times for teams. It's just a question of whether he adjusts either his body or his playing style to suit that.
Definitely. I agree wholeheartedly.
Which is a big question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why day 3 pick for him is good. But again, if he ends up in the right situation and kind of finds that identity of what kind of runner he is at the next level, I think there is some opportunity there to be a productive player, for a handful of years.
Yeah. All right, Ron, any final thoughts on the running backs before we close this thing out? We ran long, but we had a lot to talk about on this one.
We did. There was a lot of backs. This was fun, man. I was looking forward to doing this show with you now for quite a few weeks. Now it's the scouts begging the GMs on our building the board shows. Well, you guys got one more tonight.
That's actually delayed to tomorrow.
Oh, perfect. And everybody should tune into that when you're able to. It'll be on tomorrow's Friday. So tune in. And yeah, man, I'm excited. I just, now that like free agency, the initial rush of free agency is kind of come and gone, my brain is just fully on like, I don't want to wish time away, but like I'm pumped for the NFL draft.
Yeah, I'm excited for it too. But all right, Ron, let's get out of here. The only way we know how, with a good old fashioned bear down.
Bear down, baby.
See y'all later.